If you've ever wondered what your MSP would actually be worth if you decided to sell it, you're about to get a very clear answer. My special guest today doesn't just talk about valuations, he buys MSPs for a living. He's in the market every day, analysing real deals, real financials, and real operational structures. And he's going to explain exactly how MSP valuations work, what buyers really look for, and what makes your number go up or down.
Hey everybody, Earl Foote here. I am founder CEO of Nexus IT.
And it's so cool to have you on the podcast because you and I met for the first time at the back end of last year at ScaleCon. I was actually moderating a panel that you were on, and it was about M&A, mergers and acquisitions, and very much the subject of today's conversation, which is how much is my MSP worth? And it was so cool to meet you there. And then we bumped into each other at MSP Global, which was in Barcelona like a month later.
Super random.
I feel... I know, right? It's so cool to actually get you on the show, Earl. Thank you so much. And that is the topic that we're talking about: is how much is my MSP worth? And one of the things that struck me about that panel was that you have some very, very clear opinions backed up with evidence of what an MSP is worth and what affects that valuation. And I'm sure it's the number one question that you get. It's certainly a question that comes up for me as well. So before we dive into that, let's just have a little bit about your background. So tell us how you got into this and how you started acquiring MSPs in the first place.
Yeah, very good. So I'm 27 years into my journey of building my MSP. Paul, it's been nearly 3 decades, quite some time. Started acquiring about 13 years ago. We've acquired today 8 MSPs that we've fully integrated into Nexus IT at this point. We are one of the very few founder-led, founder-owned M&A platforms in the United States. In other words, we're not PE owned, we're not family office owned. We are an independent, organization. The reality is the first kind of 3 transactions that came our way were opportunistic. They were local MSPs that were either, wanted to get out of the business or were moving out of state, and they wanted a good, safe landing spot for their people and their clients. And so it wasn't something I was really planning at the time, that just opportunities came to me, and we were able to structure deals with those organizations. And, after, we did a few of them, we made it part of the strategy, right? We were like, okay, this is something we know how to do. We can do it. It's a way that we can, accelerate our growth, and create better value for everybody, that's part of this process. The clients, the people, the founder owners. So here we are, now having raised a significant quantity of capital, kind of like a mini fund for us to execute and buy 3 to 6 MSPs per year right now. That's kind of the game plan.
But it's quite a jump to go from buying 2 or 3 local competitors to actually raising a ton of cash, which I'm guessing there's an element of risk, of personal risk, and I guess business risk in that as well. And to go on such a very fast and almost aggressive, if you don't mind me using that word, aggressive, acquisition journey. What was it? What was the thing that made you say, like, screw it, I'm going to do it?
Yeah, I mean, you're entirely accurate, Paul. There is definitely risk to this, right? Look, I have big dreams, big vision, and I believe in myself. I believe in our team. I believe in what we're building and the value that it brings to our people and to our clients. I wasn't really, happy or content to have kind of call it a run-of-the-mill MSP. And I don't say that in a derogatory manner, but an average MSP, of $3 million a year in revenue or $5 million a year in revenue, and growing at 10% per year, which is a pretty standard MSP. In fact, a lot of MSPs, don't break $1 million a year or $2 million a year. I don't know. I'm more ambitious than that, and that's kind of boring to me. So, you're right. I mean, I put a lot on the line here, for what we're doing. I could have taken liquidity events, prior, or exits, prior, and hedged my future with that. But I'm looking to build a brighter future for myself and for everybody else involved. Today, including myself, there are 10 total shareholders in the organization, and of course, beyond. Creating a world-class experience for our people and our clients, we are focused on creating, significant financial outcomes for the shareholders, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an everyone wins kind of scenario. And I guess if you haven't got that private equity or that family office, so if there isn't someone else's money sat there, then you don't have the pressures towards that group as well, which makes perfect sense. So there's a small diversion I want to take in terms of subject before we get onto the main subject. So the main subject is how much is my MSP worth, and that's coming up in a second. The small diversion I want to take is, let's say there's an MSP listening to this podcast or watching this on YouTube, and they're thinking, I'd like to buy a local competitor, or I'd like to buy another MSP. And actually, I'm sure you have that conversation all the time, because I have that conversation all the time. And mostly those people never actually take action on it for whatever reason. But for someone in that scenario that's just having that thought, what would you say is a good first step to start to explore it, see if it's the right thing for them?
Yeah, I think most definitely find advisors or consultants that can really educate you about the process and what's involved, and the things that are going to happen in the business or can happen. You really do have to be prepared for M&A. It's not something that you can just do as a random act without preparing and making sure that your business is in a place where you can do this. So it's not easy to take your focus off of the day-to-day operations of the business to go look for other MSPs to buy, to work through the process of buying them and then integrating them, right? And so from the time you start looking for an MSP to the time you contract an MSP or to buy it or actually execute the purchase, it's easily oftentimes 6 to 12 months, and then you're going to take 6 to 12 months for integration as well. And so you and your team need to be able to take focus off of day-to-day operations. You need to make sure you have the bandwidth, the cycles, you have the team, you have the expertise. Granted, you're going to learn through the process, but having advisors around you that can really help educate you, about the process and how to get your business ready for this is very important, because it's not too uncommon for founders to think that they're ready to acquire another business, to do so and to really cause some significant problems in their business and the business they're acquiring because they're not ready for it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I would imagine the first acquisition is the hardest one, because it is a complete distraction. And you especially if you're if you're buying people as well, we all read the culture clashes. In fact, you read of very, very big mergers, don't you, of companies where they can never quite get the two cultures and they end up splitting that out. Okay, let's get back onto the main subject then. Yeah. What are the things that affect the valuation of an MSP? So I'm a business owner. You're a business owner. To be fair, you're much more highly educated in what a business is worth than I am. But we all have an idea of what our business is worth. And I sold my first business back in 2016. And luckily, the broker that I picked is a very respectable and expensive broker here in the UK. And the first thing they did was downplay my expectations. And they said, look, this is your revenue, this is your profit. Your business is worth X, right? Other brokers who want a bigger fee up front and less of a fee at the back end will tell you it's worth this much higher, so you sign up with them. So that was really, and I'm led to believe that's quite a unique thing, that actually brokers are really bad at overvaluing businesses. So when you're looking at an MSP or advising an MSP on what it's worth and what money they might make, what are the factors that you typically look at?
There's a lot involved in this, really, Paul, right? And it really does depend on, the acquirer, right? The buyer here. So you might have financial buyers, for example, like a PE firm or a family office. You might have a strategic play, for example. And they're going to look at these things a little bit different. And then you've got buyers like us, founder-owned, founder-led M&A platform. So really, we kind of acquire as a strategic, buyer. From a financial buyer standpoint, they're certainly they're going to look at your revenue and your EBITDA. They want to look at your growth. In recent years, they want to look at things like the quality of the client book, the quality of the talent within your organization. How long are your contracts, right? How much of your revenue is recurring revenue versus one-time revenue, non-recurring, right? How profitable are your gross margins across your products and services, right? And then how that gross margin translates into EBITDA, right? And are you achieving call it a world-class EBITDA, right? Or a higher end EBITDA. On the lower side, like a buyer probably isn't really going to entertain a business until they're about 15% EBITDA. Certainly want to look for world class, more of a 20 to 25, and those that really are excelling are 30% EBITDA in the MSP space. That's not easy to get to. Some I've seen as high as 35%. If they really figure out how to fine tune their operations and deliver, very kind of specialized models, 30 to 35% sometimes, is achievable. So, and then, your top line revenue and your EBITDA do play a huge role. A strategic buyer like myself, we do want to look at things like, what industries are you serving? Are you specialized, in, for example, we focus in healthcare and financial services, right? We want to look at, do you have good cyber and compliance capabilities within the organization and good talent on that front? What's your client retention rate, right? Like, are you retaining 95% of your clients and your existing revenue every year, or are you retaining 60%? Because if you're retaining 60%, that's a big problem, right? Are you retaining your talent, right? That's another thing. For us as strategic buyers, we're going to look at leadership, philosophical kind of ideas around how you manage and what your culture looks like, because we want to bring the two organizations together into one team, and we need to make sure that we can mesh those, right? A financial buyer may not be quite as concerned about that sometimes. So in terms of what the valuation really comes to, it does depend on that top line revenue and on that EBITDA, and then those other kind of considerations can influence, right? Particularly like if you're growing, average growth rate of an MSP in the United States is about 10%. If you're growing at 40%, 50% per year or higher than that, it can help, boost your valuation up a bit. Say an MSP that's, somewhere in the range of, call it 300,000 to maybe 750,000 in EBITDA, right? They're, depending upon how they're strategically positioned and the quality of the operations, the quality of the team, the client book, the revenue, it's probably worth something around 2 to maybe on the high side, 5x revenue. Sorry, EBITDA, not revenue. We got to fix that.
Yeah, if you're paying that, someone's definitely knocking on your door.
Yeah, exactly. Once you're reaching around $1 million, to $2 million in EBITDA, $1 million a year EBITDA business on the low side is probably worth, the very lowest, 3x. But often worth 5 to 6, sometimes even 7 if they're very, very well positioned and they've got a really good thriving business. $2 million EBITDA business is going to trade for something more like 4 to 10x. 10x on the really high side if they're if they're really well positioned and got have a great operation. And then the multiples start to go up, right? At 5 million, 5 to 10 million, you could be talking about an organization that's worth, something like 8 to 12x EBITDA. We're seeing, for example, in recent transactions, and by the way, I'm talking in terms of, United States market, right? Transactions that are happening here. I don't pretend to know what the transactions look like in the UK or Australia or places like that, but I expect that they're similar, right? Once you start getting to a business that's something like, 10 to 12 million EBITDA, or some of those that have traded recently that are more like 15 to 18 million in EBITDA, that business can be worth 12 up to maybe about 18x.
Okay.
We have in recent years seen a few trade that were very hyper specialized. We've seen a few trade in the 20 to 22x that were around 20 million in EBITDA. So there's a wide range here, Paul, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just jump in. So much value there, and so many figures there. I was getting a bit lost in like, wow, totally. So much valuation. So that's the beauty of a podcast and a transcription on our website is if you were listening to Earl there and thinking, I just got lost, you can just go back and look in the transcriptions, look at what your EBITDA is, and sort of plug into Earl's suggestion there. And Earl, I lost track. Did you explain what EBITDA is?
I didn't. Earnings before, I did not. Earnings before, let's see, interest, taxes, and amortization. So it's essentially kind of a net profit number, right? So your accountant, or if you have a CFO, or a controller within your organization, they should know how to calculate that for you. It's not your net profit, but it's usually a little bit more than that, because you're adding back in any interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization in that number.
The M&A world loves jargon, doesn't it? It loves its acronyms. I mean, we thought the MSP world was full of acronyms and jargon, but the M&A world is a whole new step up. And EBITDA is what you learn on day one, on hour one of day one, I think. So that's exactly right. That's really helpful, Earl. And let's just sort of bring this back for the average sort of listener to this podcast, or people who watch my videos, who are typically somewhere between thinking of starting up and around about that 2-3 million mark. That's typically, obviously we have all sorts of different people that consume our content, but that's typically who we're looking at. So for those people, and obviously you've given loads of ideas of where to start. As you said, the most important thing is top line revenue and bottom line. What's at the top of the sheet and what's at the bottom of the sheet? That's going to have the biggest impact. So if you were thinking, if you were an MSP and you were thinking, right, I do want out, I've had my time, or I've built it up, or I'm ill, or a partner's ill, or one of the many reasons that people sell their businesses. How far out would you recommend starting to think about that? And what would you recommend as an action plan to actually start getting that business into shape, to start having conversations with people like yourself or the other buyers out there?
Yeah, I would say start preparing 3 to 5 years before your planned exit, because there's a lot you want to do to be able to position your business, right? So that it's very marketable when you take it to market to sell it. To start, I would make sure either you build a leadership team that has been through this before. Maybe it's not in managed services, but in something similar, tech-enabled services of some time, or of some type, or some sort of tech services, and put together a game plan. Right, study what really influences the EBITDA multiple in your type or category of MSP or MSSP, and then strategically work on building your business towards those valuation triggers that optimize your exit. Some of those things might be things like industry focus, right? Focus on a specific industry vertical where you can really solve specific problems, right? Focus on growing, organic growth rate. Focus on client retention. Focus on your operational metrics. Focus on employee retention, and not just client retention, but client satisfaction and NPS scores. Focus on getting your gross margins into a really good place, right? Well-performing MSPs are usually going to have gross margins on their managed services of around 45 to maybe on the high end 55%. If you're talking about cyber services, 50 to maybe 60 or 65% in cyber and compliance services. Those are pretty common. Call them best in class gross margins there on the types of services that we all sell. So if you're not there, which is really common, in a build stage MSP, you might be more like 25, 30, 35% gross margins, and you're going to want to move your business towards delivering more effectively, financially for your clients, while not sacrificing the service, right? So the real thing is either find advisors or build a team that knows what you're doing, and then have a specific game plan and execute that game plan so that you can optimize the valuation of your business when it's time to sell.
Yeah. Okay, Earl, we could talk about this for hours. I mean, and in fact, having sat on a stage with you, I know you could definitely talk about this for hours, because you give so much value with every answer. So thank you for that. Let's get you back on the show. It's going to be next year. I mean, it sounds crazy at this stage of 2026 to be talking about 2027, but let's get you back on the show in the future, and we'll explore this in more detail. For now, just tell us very briefly, what exactly is Nexus IT looking for? So for MSPs listening to this or watching who are thinking, hey, it might be worth me having a conversation with this guy, give us an idea of what kind of MSP looks good for you, and what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, very good. Best way to get in touch, just hit me up on LinkedIn or Instagram, Earl Foote, or Base Slapping CEO. You can look me up by that too. Let's see. What was the second part of that question? I totally just drew a blank.
What kind of MSP are you looking for? What's the ideal acquisition for you? Who do you want to talk to?
Very good. We're usually looking for an MSP that's somewhere in the range of 2 to about 8 million in revenue right now. Usually 1 million to maybe 3 or 4 million in EBITDA. We are looking for those that are strategically positioned, in cyber and compliance, generally working in regulated industry like we do, like healthcare and finance. And certainly, that have built a well-respected, well-operating organization, right? That's kind of the profile of what we're looking for throughout the United States. Right now, we don't have plans to try to go global in any way whatsoever, but throughout the United States, we're looking for awesome MSPs and founders that either want to join and build with us, or they're looking to transition their organization onto somebody else and want to find a good home for their clients and their people. Once again, I am Earl Foote. Find me on LinkedIn or Instagram. It's EARLFOOTE. There's an E on the end of Foot there, or Base Slapping CEO.
For MSPs around the world, the MSP Marketing Podcast with Paul Green.